So in business, how do you take a small advantage and just blow it up into a massive win? Well, the answer often comes down to this one really powerful and kind of risky concept: leverage. You can think of it as the art of amplification. You're using what you have to get way, way more. Let's break down how that actually works.
Okay, let's start with a puzzle that honestly seems to break the rules of common sense. Get this. How can a company borrow money, pay interest on that money, and end up with less total profit, but somehow make its owners, the shareholders, even richer? It sounds totally impossible, right? But the answer to this little riddle reveals one of the most powerful forces in all of finance.
All right, so here's that puzzle laid out in black and white. It's a tale of two plans. Over on the left, you've got a company funded entirely by its owners, all equity, and it makes a decent 12% return for them. But now look at the right. It's the same company, but this time it borrows money for half of its funding. Now, you'll notice the total profit is actually lower because, they have to pay interest, but look at the return for the owners, the return on equity. It jumps from 12% all the way up to 16.5%. So, what is going on here? How is that even possible?
Well, the secret to solving our puzzle is a concept called financial leverage. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's all about strategically using other people's money to your own advantage. So, to put a more formal definition on it, financial leverage is just the use of borrowed money, debt, to finance the assets that make a business run. And the whole point, the entire goal, is to juice the returns for the company's owners, the shareholders. To really get this, you just have to remember that a company has two basic ways to get money. There's equity, which is the owner's own cash, and then there's debt, which is borrowed money. And here's the absolute key difference. The cost of that debt, the interest you have to pay, is a fixed cost. It doesn't matter if the company has a massive, record-breaking year or a totally terrible one. The bank gets paid the exact same amount. That's the crucial part. Okay, so this brings us to a really important number: earnings per share, or EPS. Now, the formula might look a little intimidating, but the idea behind it is actually super simple. Think of it like this. A company makes some operating profit, which finance folks call EBIT. First, it has to pay the bank its fixed interest. Then it has to pay the government its taxes. And whatever profit is left over after that, that gets divided up among the owners. That final slice of the pie for each owner, that's your EPS. And that, in turn, leads us to what is really the ultimate scorecard for any investor: return on equity, or ROE. This one answers the most important question of all. For every single dollar I put into this company, how much profit did you actually make for me? And this is the number that jumped from 12% to 16.5% back in our little puzzle. So here it is. Here's the secret sauce. Imagine a company is earning, say, a 20% return on all its assets, but the debt it used to buy some of those assets only costs 10% in interest. So what happens to that extra 10% profit? Well, it doesn't go to the bank. It all flows directly to the shareholders. And because they had to put up less of their own money to get the whole thing started, their personal rate of return gets magnified. That is the power of financial leverage. But here's the thing. Borrowing money isn't the only way to create leverage. This same principle of amplification, it turns out, can be found right in the middle of a company's day-to-day operations. And this is what we call operating leverage. It's a really similar idea, but instead of focusing on fixed financial costs like interest payments, we're now talking about fixed operating costs. Things like the rent on your factory, that expensive piece of machinery, or even key employee salaries. These are the bills you have to pay no matter what, whether you sell one widget or a million of them. So just like we compared debt and equity before, the key to understanding this is to compare fixed costs with variable costs. Variable costs, like raw materials, they go up and down right along with your sales. But those fixed costs, they're like a constant hurdle you have to clear every single month. And the real magic of operating leverage kicks in the moment you've sold enough to finally get over that hurdle. Yeah, this chart shows it perfectly. If you have a business with a ton of fixed costs, you're going to have a high break-even point. I mean, you have to sell a lot of stuff just to cover your bills. But once you pass that point, the whole story changes. Because your biggest costs are already paid for, every single sale after that adds a huge chunk of profit straight to the bottom line. Suddenly, your profits are growing way faster than your sales. That's operating leverage in action. Okay, so up to this point, leverage probably seems like some kind of magic formula for printing money, right?
But, and this is a huge but, there's a critical catch. This amplification machine, it doesn't have an off switch, and it works in both directions.
Honestly, if you remember one thing from this, let it be this. Leverage is an amplifier, period. It doesn't care if the numbers are going up or down, it just takes whatever change is happening, positive or negative, and makes it bigger. And yeah, that's absolutely fantastic when times are good, but it can be completely devastating when they're not. Let's put some real numbers on this to see what I mean. So imagine a highly leveraged company is having a great year, and its operating profit, that EBIT number, grows by a solid 25%. Well, because of that amplifier effect we talked about, that nice 25% gain can turn into a mind-blowing 100% increase in earnings per share for the owners. I mean, they're ecstatic. But what happens if there's a downturn and that same operating profit falls by 25%? Well, the amplifier doesn't care. That 25% drop gets magnified into a 100% collapse in earnings per share. Boom. Just like that, the owner's profits are completely wiped out. So you see, the very same force that creates these incredible gains can also create absolutely devastating losses. And this really highlights that there are two different kinds of risk here. First, there's operating risk. That's just the natural ups and downs of any business. Sales go up, sales go down. But financial risk is different. That's the extra risk that a company's leadership chooses to take on when they decide to use debt. It's not a given. It's a deliberate strategic choice. So you see, leverage isn't really good or bad. It's just a tool, a very, very powerful tool. And how a company decides to use it, how it finds that perfect balance between risk and reward, is honestly one of the most critical strategic decisions it will ever have to make. Okay, so this table basically lays out the four possible combos. A company can have high or low operating leverage, right? And it can choose to pair that with either high or low financial leverage. The extremes here tell a pretty clear story. If you combine high operating leverage with high financial leverage, that high/high box, you are absolutely in the danger zone. A tiny dip in sales could be a total catastrophe. On the other hand, the low/low box is super safe, but you're probably leaving a ton of potential growth on the table. So the real strategic question, the interesting choice, is right there in the middle. Is it better to run a business with high fixed costs but very little debt? Or is it smarter to have a business with low fixed costs but then use a lot of debt? Which of those mixed strategies is the better bet? Well, the answer really comes down to one profound idea: flexibility. As it turns out, high financial leverage can be reversed, but high operating leverage often can't. Just think about what that means in the real world. A company that's taken on too much debt can, over time, use its profits to pay down those loans. It can de-risk itself. But what about a company whose risk comes from a giant, specialized factory? It can't just sell off half the factory when sales take a dip. That massive fixed cost is baked right into the DNA of the business. And that's what makes financial leverage a more flexible and often a more manageable type of risk. And so we're left with this fundamental trade-off that's right at the heart of business strategy. Leverage is the engine of ambition, right? It's the tool you use to accelerate growth. But it's also the architect of risk, magnifying your failures with the exact same power. So for any business, where is that perfect balance between ambition and safety? Finding it? Well, that's not just a math problem. That's the true art of strategy.